Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Let me turn my camera. Just have a little bit of Oh my, that didn't sound good, did it? All right, just had a little problem uploading today's presentation, and it's just a minute away. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit while I'm getting some of our other stuff ready. Today I'm really excited actually about this program. It's one of those topics that gets a little bit of attention, but not a lot of technical clinical backup, validity, if you will, right? And so I wanted to really focus on that and talk about sodium intake, salt intake. It has been demonized since the 70s, and it doesn't deserve it. And there's a lot of negative comments about the, let me just make sure this is uploaded right there. There's a lot of negative comments about the salt and how much we should be taking. And they tell us that we should be taking less than 2,300 milligrams a day. And I'm going to show if you should be taking it. Now, of course, you want to talk with your doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not your prescribing physician. And so you always want to talk to your doctor about making those changes. And if you will, just text me with any questions that you may have. Just text me if you can hear me. It's Tricia. She can see and hear. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to do better at the end of the program to go back and look at the messages. So why don't you just text them in there? I'll go back at the end and try to answer any if you have questions. We've got a lot of stuff to go over, and so let's get started. Glad to see we got a bunch of people here. That's wonderful. Let's go right into the presentation. Let's get rid of my face and go right into the program. As always, this is the 3 Believe Wellness Program. We come at you weekly and talk to you about how to improve your health, how to make things better, how to take your situation from unhealthy to healthier to healthy to optimum health. And so we're going to talk about how to do that every week. We're going to talk about how to improve that. Everything is always backed up with clinical data and studies. And so let's get right to it. Just as a reminder, I'm a food scientist. I specialize in chronic disease and metabolic syndrome. We do that through food and through natural means. I've been doing that for the last almost 12 years now, coming into working with doctors and clinics all around the country, helping them to make the change from traditional medication and surgeries to a holistic approach of being well and healthy. And so we've been at it for a little while. The reason why is because sadly, this is the national health reality. We are overweight. We have way too high cholesterol, mainly the modified LDL, and you heard me do a program on that just last week. And then we have high blood pressure. Too many of us are diabetic. That's an epidemic growing at a terrible growth. And then we have fatty liver disease. Not as popular, but definitely as important. Then we have the reality of our neighbors and our families and our friends, and they sadly 8 out of 10 of those people have at least one of these 4 conditions, and we got to do something about it. I was one of them. 12 years ago now, I need to update this slide. I was 280 pounds. I wrestled 190 pounds in college. Got overweight, worked too much. I had all the symptoms. I had over 10 chronic issues, and I lost them all in 12 weeks, just doing the same diet that I'm talking to you about. And that just simply means that you can too. So over the last decade and a quarter, I've been helping doctors with their patients and people, tens of thousands of people. I've been honored to be able to be involved in that many transformations. It's really a wonderful blessing. Now, just disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor. This information should only be used for informational purposes. Always consult your doctor when making any lifestyle change. Content and the examples shared are from personal stories of the people that come in or mine, and don't claim to cure any disease or ailment. So we're going to take a lot of data from Dr. James Dianico Antonio, and he is a trained pharmacist. Now, he's not a practicing pharmacist. He's a research scientist, knows about pharmacology, which is great. He's a cardiovascular research scientist, and he has a couple of books out. Great data. One of the books I'll be referencing talks about salt, in fact. And then we'll be talking with some experts from Dr. Jason Fung. Great first name. And why do I talk to them is he is a specialist in medicine, pediatrics, and mainly concerns himself with the kidneys. Now, as we all know, sodium has to do with the kidneys. And so that's why I grabbed some extra stuff from him. So we got some experts that I'll be drawing from today. So I want to talk about not the villain. Salt has been given a terrible bad rap on being the villain. And mainly the news is that salt is bad for you. You need to limit how much you're taking in your diet. The more I research on this subject, the more research I uncover that the absolute opposite is true. I started promoting that salt is not the villain back in 2008. First, I will start by saying salt is great for you. It's good for you. You have to have salt. And in fact, I'm going to talk about and see if you agree with me that you need to actually be taking more salt than you currently are. And especially if you're on the diet that you should be on. Because depending on the type of diet you're following, your salt should in some cases be limited, but you should be taking more of it. So let's start off by asking, why has salt been perceived as bad for us and for our health? When was the last time you heard your doctor tell you with a really firm tone, you need more salt? If you think about it, it's really a great question. Where did all the low salt advice come from? And basically what happened to salt and what happened and is still happening to cholesterol? So what the demonization of cholesterol that started is also the same demonization that has happened to salt. At least has been from the 70s. All of a sudden, though, cholesterol is no longer apparently not as much a demon as it used to be considered. And what is that's changing, right? And it's clinical studies. It's just now that people are looking at these new standards. So the new standard in this, or the standards in the 70s, were the 6 pillars of demonization. One of them was salt, cholesterol, fat was on the list, saturated fat, high carb, and protein was the not demonized, but that's where you should be going, high carb and limiting your protein. The 1977 dietary goals, that's the ones that you and I are mostly familiar with, became the really being pushed. The committee was formed in 1977, pushed it through in 1980, and the standards are updated every 5 years. And the low sodium dogma has been updated every 5 years right along with it, with the message of eat less of it. No one is asking why. Where is the evidence to support that we should be demonizing salt in the first place? Until now, finally, some people are asking. Since 1977, salt in our bloodstream is blamed for too much blood volume. I mean, you got too much blood in our bodies, and for creating high blood pressure and a major cause for cardiovascular events like heart attack and stroke. And all these issues are related to elevated blood pressure. I don't know if it's the right word to say. I don't want to sound too harsh, but it kind of feels like fraud in a way, because the science was so weak back in 1977 in order to justify labeling salt as the villain. I want to point out that having a prolonged high blood pressure is not healthy for us. So I'm in support of that. Absolutely. And if you have high blood pressure, you need to bring it down. I just want to make sure that you understand the truth about salt. Okay? Its relationship to blood pressure and your overall health. So basically, what ends up happening is the dietary guidelines are recommendations from a committee. There are 12 members with 2 chair members, 2 chairs, so there are a total of 14. All of them have PhDs except for one. He's an MD. So it looks to be a body of educated professionals, right? The type that we would want to sit on this type of a committee, right? They're not idiots by any means. And so let's go through some of the guidelines. Here's what the newest dietary guideline from it's for 2015 to 2020. We get another one in another year. And I'm going to go through the recommendation from the committee. Now, this is a 144-page report. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through 144 pages. I'm going to just point out, I did go through them preparing for this web class, but I want to pull out some of the things that I found really, really interesting. Now, if you go through here, I just want to show you, look at the pictures of people. So really focus on the pictures of people that you see here. They did a great job of showing diversity of ethnicity, all right, men, women, people of different races. And I don't want to be nitpicky, but do any of these people look like your typical American? Meaning 79% of Americans are overweight. There's not a single overweight picture in any part of this book. There are none at all. But that's not a true representation. Do you see anybody taking medication? Do you see anybody giving themselves shots? Right? 70% of Americans take medications. Why don't they show that? That's an extreme high average. So I understand what they're doing. They're doing a little bit of media hype here. They want to instill the impression that you eat the type of foods that we're telling you about in this book, and you're going to look like these people. Sadly, that's not the case. Right, now you've seen this. The old food pyramid was replaced with what they call now the food plate, right? And the food plate has replaced the pyramid, and it's the same. It's the same story. It's the same ratio of carbohydrates and fats and proteins and sweets and liquors, right? They do say, you can't really see it very well in the slide or the picture on the left, but it tells you in bright fluorescent pink. These are the things you got to limit. You got to limit your butter. You got to limit your sodium, and you got to limit your salt. I mean, your sugar, which I agree with. That part they got right. So I found this interesting, that to me this is admission that their advice isn't the best for our health. Americans have cut their salt and fat, and more people are exercising more and more all the time. In this chart right here, it's showing that it's kind of hard. I'll have to explain it to you, but these numbers, these little yellow circles, back in 2000, it showed that 49.1% of the population was following the standards of the diet that they recommended in this book. And then you can see every year it's going up. Right now we're sitting at 57.8% in 2010 are following the guidelines. And yet, if we put over this in the same period of time, the people that have lost their weight as a nation, is it going down? People that have high blood pressure, is it going down? Or diabetes or cardiovascular event or heart disease? No, it's going up. So they say, this is what I mean by admission to that it doesn't work. They say that people are getting healthier by following their recommendation. They're adopting the philosophy. And yet, the other studies are clearly showing that we're not getting healthier. To me, that's a strong admission that their little program isn't working. In spite of, let me explain this graph. This is the graph about how many Americans are exercising, aerobic and muscle strengthening, okay? So in the blue bar, the smaller bar, that's from 2008. In the orange bar, that's 2013. And in every one, the orange bar is higher. That means that more people are exercising than ever before. And so over time, they show that in every age group, both male and female, children and adults, even our elderly citizens, everybody's exercising more now than they were in 2013. And yet, as a nation, we're less healthy. All right, what's wrong with this? Let's look more into this study. Now, I do have some hopes in that I'm hoping that they mean what they say. I found this really interesting. I'm just going to read it because you don't know, it's not, you can't see it very well. So it says here that however, the relationship of early nutrition to health outcomes throughout the lifespan has grown as a public health interest. And it is expected that evidence will become sufficiently robust to support additional dietary guidelines in the future. Okay, what did that just mean? That means that they didn't rely on any clinical studies or robust scientific evidence in 1977, and from then to now, in that 40-year period of time, to base their recommendations. They're telling us what to eat. They're hoping that they will start using evidence-based in the future. Wow. There are tens of thousands of clinical studies. Now, I don't believe that these men and women on the committee are trying to harm us, to hurt us by any means. I just believe that they are following the guidelines and dogma of pressures from industry is one, from leaders of our food supply. So let me go into something I found really, really interesting. This is a graph that they're basically telling us what to eat, and they break it down into categories. They break it down into carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and they tell you how much you should be doing on a daily and a weekly basis. Now, this is based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, all right? So if you look here, I did the math for you, all right? I broke it out that 55% of the calories are coming from carbs, 20% are coming from protein, and 24% are coming from fat. Now, that's much less than what the clinical studies have identified as being healthy, but it's much less, it's somewhat less than what the nation is eating, right? It's less than what my chart, which I'll show you, which is the reflection of the clinical studies, has been teaching. But look down here at the bottom. I found it really, really interesting that this calorie balance, if you add up the food in there they recommended, doesn't even come to 2,000 calories, it comes to 1,500. Even if you add at the very bottom of the screen, it says limit on calories for other uses, 270, we're still below the 2,000, right? So let me tell you what's going to happen in the physiology of the person that eats this kind of diet. 55% of their calories from carbohydrates. That person that follows this diet will be hungry within an hour or two after eating each meal, which means that they'll have cravings. With 55% of their calories coming from carbs in that meal, where do you think they're going to go for a snack? Yep, that's right. Sugar and carbs, because that's what's driving their hunger. Now, let's only allow them the 270 mentioned in the chart. So when they go to snack, let's just assume they're only going to consume 270 calories. That would be a total of, 1,873 calories, right? Here's the problem. When your diet is made up of that much carbs, you're going to get hungrier sooner because the chemical of sugar is hijacking. That's the power, the chemical power of sugar, that you're going to crave more sugar. Here's another report, okay, from the 2013, the Food and Drug Administration. Americans eat on average 3,600 calories, not 2,000, or not even the 1,500 that chart actually came out to be. They're eating 3,682 calories, right? Let's break it down where those calories are coming from in this report from the Food and Agriculture. 424 are from meat, okay? And 600 are from sugars and sweeteners like candy and pop. 159 from alcoholic beverages like beer. 801 from grains and breads. And 689 from oils, not from healthy fats, from oils, okay? Now you total all that up, and this is what that's actually looking like, which is a more realistic reflection of what Americans are eating. 62% of their calories are coming from carbs. 17 are coming from protein, and 20 are coming from fat. What do the studies tell us we should be eating? It says that it's just flip-flop. We should be eating 65 to 70 calories of our should be coming from fat. 20 plus should be coming from protein, and our carbohydrate should be down at 10% or below. Now, in this chart, it broke it down into grams so that you can more easily use it in your diet. But this is what the studies are telling us, and I'm hoping that in the future, manuals that come out, that the government will do what they say and will actually start using the same studies that I'm using, not on opinion, because what they're basing it on is not based on studies. It's based purely on opinion. So I'm not saying that these 14 people on the committee have it out for us. I'm not saying that there's some conspiracy and that they don't agree or don't want us to have good health. But when they assemble and they get these opinions of what we should be eating, it's only reasonable that each one of them has their own personal agenda and belief. I don't know what they are, and I'm not going to speculate. But there's no oversight committee that can hold them responsible to the recommendations that they're making. If they choose to ignore a certain amount of analysis or study or finding, they can still get away with it. You need to understand that these guidelines are not always based on the best evidence that is out there, on the latest research. Much of it is based on opinions and some correlation findings, not causation evidence, but things that look to be related from the 1970s, over 40 years ago, right? When people can start to understand that there's not a single clinical study, not one, that has ever been proven that cutting your salt intake is going to reduce cardiovascular event or premature death. Not one. And you can start then to understand why we are in the state of nutritional whiplash, because we're basing a lot of our guidelines and opinions on on that opinion, not on scientific fact. It's incredible when you look at these guidelines and the message that they have. The strong language that I'm using is to clarify the current guidelines nutritional advice. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I were to say that one message is so strong to say how deadly it is to eat the way the guidelines are suggesting, including limiting salt intake. And other messages is strongly telling you how deadly it is for you to have too much salt. Just remember, that's one side of the argument, my side, right? So, but my side has hundreds, even thousands of clinical studies to support my side of the claim. And their side has literally zero evidence, not any clinical studies that refute the other opinion. Now, that's pretty strong evidence, if you ask me. For example, the science behind salt being deadly simply isn't there. There hasn't been robust studies to show that people are dropping like flies if they take too much sodium. Right now, there are tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people that are taking 2, 3, even 4, even 10 times the recommended amount of salt daily, and have been for years, and yet should be quite enlightening that you realize that these people that are doing this, I'm one of them, aren't dropping dead because they're having too much salt. I don't have high blood pressure. I used to, and I took much less salt then than I do now. So I was reading that the initial report on the evidence of the dangers of sodium were based on just 200 people, and it wasn't strong evidence on those 2,000. It wasn't a placebo-based, double-blind, randomized clinical study like they're supposed to be, like my side is. More of a correlation and even a questionnaire. They're simply asking them what they ate. That's not a study. That's the opinion of the person they're asking. It's not scientific at all. I can't call that evidence. Can you? Basically, they only had 200 hypertensive patients that they asked them what they were eating. And then they extrapolated those blood pressure lowering benefits of lowering their salt to the entire population of 300 million people. Even though the committee never looked at any of the harm that will happen when you cut your salt intake. So even if blood pressure is lowered, when you take salt. So if you've ever had high blood pressure and you did reduce your sodium intake and your blood pressure went down, in nearly every single case, the amount that went down was remarkably small. Your heart rate always goes up. And that's to tell you that the reduction in blood pressure is generally due to volume depletion. See, when you have more salt in your body, you can have more blood, and that can make your blood pressure go up. But that's only when you're in a high carbohydrate diet, because the insulin tells your kidneys to hold on to those water retentive minerals like sodium. When you're in a low carb diet, insulin doesn't have that influence, and you dump that all out every time you're urinating. So one surrogate marker that low salt advocates can hang their hat on, supposedly, is if it starts to disintegrate, their theory, their opinion starts to disintegrate when you start actually looking at that, what is even going on with this reduction in blood pressure. You can blame generally, it's lowered because of the reduction of blood volume, not because the dangers of salt was removed from their system. Let's go into some of these studies that I'm talking about so you can see for yourself. As far as clinical evidence, in one study of over 6,250 people, cutting salt intake did not 200, 6,250 people, cutting their salt did not reduce the risk of heart attack, stroke, or death. There's your study. You can check it out for yourself right there at that link at the bottom. In another study in 2013, it showed that lower salt consumption actually increases your risk of death from heart disease. And you can find the information in that study. A review of the available research reveals that much of the science behind the supposed link between salt and high blood pressure is dubious and doubtful at best. According to the Scientific American, the population that ate the most salt, about 14 grams a day, had a lower median blood pressure than the population that ate the least, about half as much salt a day. What does that tell you? Okay, you can't avoid this, right? And another study, the large study published in, there's a little typo, that's in the year 1984, compared sodium intake with blood pressure in subjects from 52 international research centers and found no relationship between, not 52 people, we're talking about research centers with thousands of people, no relationship between sodium intake and the prevalence of hypertension. Okay? Here's another study. For every study that suggests that salt is unhealthy, multiple ones reveal that it absolutely is not. And those studies that they're referencing are correlation studies. They're not causation studies like these ones are. So that's strong evidence. Here's a study in 2004, analysis of 11 salt reduction trials. So these are 11 different studies together with a group of people in each one, found that over the long term, low salt diets decrease your blood pressure by 1.1 millimeters of mercury and your systolic blood pressure by half. Okay. Let me tell you what that's like. Let me explain what that means. That equates to lowering your blood pressure from 120 over 80 to 119 over 79. Over years of taking lower salt. Is that even worth it? Well, you tell me. Let's look at the risks of taking lower salt. In a 2006 study, the American Journal compared the report daily sodium intakes of 78 million Americans to their risk of dying from heart disease over the course of 14 years. The study concluded that lower sodium diets led to a higher death rate among those with cardiovascular disease. And there's the link that you can check that out for yourself. Here's a great study. Here's this study, and I found it so interesting because this one came from the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization does support you taking less than 2,300 milligrams of salt, which is the same as what the U.S. committee recommends. Don't take more than 2,300. If you do, you're going to get a heart attack and die. Okay? So the WHO, the World Health Organization, does support it, and yet they published this study. They're showing that your rate of premature death is 2 times greater if you follow their 2,300 milligram advice. Look how it drops closer. So let me explain how this graph works. The bottom chart, the numbers along the bottom, 2.0, 4.0, that's grams of sodium per day. Okay? And then the chart on the left is the odd ratio of dying, right? So when you're at 1.0, you have 0 odds. And then if you're 1.2, you're at 20% increase, and so on, okay? So let's just look at their own chart. If you take less than, let's say you take right at 2 grams, you follow that red line up, okay, and you move it over to the left there, it shows that you're close to 2 times the odds, almost twice the odds of dying. And the U.S. is just slightly below that. Okay, now let's follow that black line as it bellies down on 1.0, right? Right where it hits the red line, the line on 0 odds of dying, you're at 4 grams. You're twice what both the WHO and the US guidelines are. And it doesn't even go up to 20% increase until you're at 12 grams increase. And still, that's at 20%. Now, I will say that those people are also people that are following a high carb diet, right? There's other studies that suggest that your line doesn't go up at all if you have a low insulin diet, simply because your body regulates the extra salt. It dumps it. It keeps you out of the danger zone. You were made to be able to get rid of excess salt. Look at the chart down at the very bottom, right? Number of events. Okay, that top line on the bottom, it says number of events. Right at, you had, this chart is a little off. It should be shifted over. Sorry, when I made this, it's shifted over here that your 1,437, the highest number of deaths, the event they're talking about is death, is sitting at 2.0, right, with the recommendation amount. And as you get higher sodium, the death rate goes down. That's what that means. Okay, so you tell me if this is good advice that we should be following. There is a difference between the quality of salt. Let's just do a quick breakdown of what kind of salt you should be taking. Natural salt, 84% of it is sodium chloride, 16% naturally occurring trace minerals that are in there, including silicon and phosphorus and vanadium and magnesium, potassium, things like that. That's the kind of salt that we put in our hydrate capsules, by the way. That's the kind of salt that we put in all of our smart foods that we make for you. Just so that you know, that's the salt that we're using. We don't use the white table salt. And the reason why is because processed table salt, the whiter it is, the more chemicals it has in it. 97% of it's sodium chloride with 2.5% of man-made chemicals to absorb moisture so that it doesn't clump. Right? And they've been linked to that these chemicals they're using are dangerous, right? Refined table salt is dried at above 1,200 degrees. And this excessive heat actually changes the chemical structure of salt. And some studies have found that it is actually toxic in our body. So 300 milligrams of sodium is what studies are showing you absolutely have to have in order to survive today, right? While natural salts containing the minerals of electrolytes that you need are vital for water balance, enzyme production, stress reduction, immune support, your adrenal and your thyroid function. So what is the best kind of salt that you should be taking? They recommend that you should be taking less than 2,300 milligrams. But if you do that, you're going to get into some major problems. So what is the best salt that you want? You want the Himalayan salts, right? The more color, the more specks that are in there, the better. Or you can get the hydrate. You can get the salt on our website. I prefer our salt because it comes from a mine under the ground. It's not exposed to any of the pollutants that are in the air. The Himalayan salts, the only negative to them is that it is exposed. So if any pollutants that are in the air and it rains, you're going to have some on the salt. Don't get hypersensitive about it. But if you can get it in a mine that's a mile under the earth, it's been there, never exposed to any pollutants, then you're just one step better. Okay. So the problem when we talk about what's happening helps when we cut our salts is one of the treatments being used to reduce the risk of cardiovascular event and mortality is to block those hormones that I have on the screen with medications. So it never makes sense to me why we should only look at blood pressure and not look at all the artery stiffening hormones that are elevated. Not to mention the stress hormones that are listed like that we have here, right? These are very, very similar to adrenaline from your adrenal glands. It works by constricting or narrowing your blood vessels and increasing your blood pressure and actually increasing your blood sugar levels. When they are doing surgery and patients' blood pressure drops to dangerous levels, guess what they use to boost blood pressure back up? They add adrenaline and cortisol to the mix, and these hormones create a spike in blood pressure, causing your heart to beat faster and your blood vessels narrow. All of this happens when you start dropping your sodium to less than 3,000 milligrams a day. The studies show that in the human body. So if you go less than 3,000, your blood vessels will narrow and your arteries start to contract, causing your heart to beat faster. Does that make sense to do that in your daily diet? That's what they do in the operating table, and they have to see those risks. So this is not good advice based on what is happening to our body. I think that promoting a diet to a society that is already heavily burdened with stress is not the best recommendation. It is underestimated about the effects of too little salt and its effect on adrenal fatigue or adrenal insufficiency, it's called. But how people are hammering their adrenal glands with our artificial stimulants, such as too much coffee and having it too often, a diet that produces high insulin or high caffeine drinks throughout the day, and most usually they are high carb. Too little electrolytes, including your friend sodium. There is a connection to excessive exercise and high risk sports. Let me ask you: are you a thrill junkie? You like having that adrenaline rush. All these things are players in the overstressed world that we live in today. But you don't have to be a member of this overstressed group if you want to take on these ugly risks, right? The adrenals and your thyroid and the healthy amount of salt are basically interconnected. They have been shown hundreds of times in animal studies and in human studies that when you cut the salt, the adrenal glands swell because they're constantly spitting out so much of the stress hormone. And after a while, the gland in animals just kind of burning out, running life fast and hard. Does that sound like anyone that you know? The medical condition is called adrenal insufficiency. A lot of people call it just adrenal fatigue. There isn't much clinical evidence, I'll admit, cataloging that adrenal insufficiency is a true medical term, but millions of people have symptoms and their feelings are real. They'll tell you that it's a very real thing. And what ends up happening with low salt is you're chronically dumping out noradrenaline and adrenaline and cortisol like crazy, and you can't burn out basically your sympathetic, or I'm sorry, you can burn out your sympathetic nervous system, and when you do that, it'll just start shutting down, all because you're taking too little salt in conjunction to these other things that are stimulating your adrenal glands. Now, these mechanisms were put there for a reason in your body, but when you really need it. So when the crisis does actually come and you really need these stress hormones to help you survive, the receptors in the cells are much less sensitive, and you can't treat as much during that event because you're already burnt out and the system's gone. Okay, so salt is one of the best ways to get iodine. essentially, or especially if you're using our hydrate and our CMR, it has a full dose of iodine, not too much, all natural. But when you follow the low sodium advice, you're potentially increasing your risk of iodine deficiency. And obviously, we know that iodine can lead to hypothyroidism, right? So if you have those symptoms, its chances are very strong, suggesting that you're getting too little salt, right? And over 50% of Americans already have prediabetes, and that's directly linked to your thyroid issues. And then that also leads to obesity. These are facts that a few have ever heard of or paid attention to. For most of you, you all remember how they've always demonized sugar, or not, how recently we demonized sugar, which is obviously terrible for you, but also not getting enough of this other white crystal we call salt can potentially lead to some very harmful effects, as bad as sugar. So they work definitely in tandem. So I'm asking you to spread the news. You get good doses of the salts that you need, iodine from the shakes, and tell them that they don't have to suffer with these symptoms that I've been talking about. Let's talk about how much salt. A teaspoon of sugar is not a teaspoon of sodium. When you're talking about sodium levels, it's not always equating to salt levels. There's about 40% sodium in a teaspoon of salt. So to get 2,300 milligrams of sodium, which I show you is 2 less, which is a teaspoon, is about 5,750 grams of salt. Okay, just multiply the sodium by 2.5 to get the salt. That's easy. Salt is made up of 50% sodium and 50% chloride. That's why we call it sodium chloride. Both are essential macronutrients, but most people don't get enough. Chloride is very important. Without it, we wouldn't have hydrochloric acid needed in your digestive system, so we can absorb our minerals. Without that, we couldn't absorb many of the nutrients. It also provides a barrier to killing off bacteria, all because of salt. That's what it's there for. Now, here, this is what you get when you have too little salt, not too much. So when you keep on taking that Tums antacid over the counter to control your heartburn, you're only making matters worse by neutralizing your stomach acid. They found that most of heartburn is caused by too little stomach acid, not too much. So you take your salt to give it the buffer that it needs so your body will make. Next time, instead of the Tums, try taking HCl with pepsin. It's a precursor to making more hydrochloric acid in your stomach. You can get it from your health food store. You'll be surprised. You'll also how the effects. It's also great if you have stomach pains when you're in problems when you're digesting meat, especially red meat. Just take one of those and it will give you the acid you need to break it down. Stomach acid is also demonized, right? It's a bad thing, causes heartburn. But did you know that chloride and sodium are the 2 minerals that are the highest concentration in your blood? It's like we are literally like walking oceans. We are salty people. And so to fear these essential minerals that make up salt just never made sense to me. When you go into the hospital and you get an IV in your arm, they don't ask you, do you have high blood pressure? People that are unconscious, they have no ability of checking them. But what do they always give them? Always give them a saline solution, sodium, and sometimes they'll even add potassium, right? Basically, your body controls your intake, and that's one of the dogmas that I want to help break. Your salt taste receptors will flip on the tongue if you get too much salt, and that's a built-in safety mechanism, and it will sense, and it would make more sense that your body would have these mechanisms for an essential mineral. Whereas your cravings for sugar, on the other hand, it's not essential nutrient. You don't have to have sugar. Your body doesn't have that flipping effect. It has a craving effect. So your sugar intake and your it goes in much the same way of salt as far as cravings, but the salt ones can be even stronger with no limit. So when I say sugar in this case, I'm talking about glucose and fructose. Your cravings for salt are absolutely controlled by your body, and so you have the osmore receptors in the brain, and you have receptors in your carotid arteries that are controlling blood volume. And your salt levels are basically your body knows if it has to have more or less of it. So don't worry about getting too much sodium. Let me give you an example. I'll tell you a story about a little baby. It was back in the 1930s. A toddler who was always chomping on salt. Yeah, he was just raiding his parents' cupboards, and they could never get him to stop eating salt. Now, this is a baby that doesn't know anything except for this natural driving. It's natural driving cravings, right? And he's looking for salt, not for sugar. Sadly, they took him to the hospital, and they strapped this poor kid down in the hospital, and he ended up dying with salt depletion because he had a salt wasting kidney disease. And they didn't know that he had a kidney disease. They just knew, of course, that salt is terrible for you. Now, this is an extreme example, I know, but what it does is it shows us in the case that, one, if we don't get enough salt, we'll die, and the case that your cravings for salt are real and you should follow them. You dying from sodium, you would have to consume 1.5 pounds of salt at one time. Okay, you can die from it, right? But you'd have to drink it all at one time, put it in a jug, 1.5 pounds. When do people do that? Just don't worry about it. Before we had refrigerators to preserve our food, everything was laced with salt. Okay, if you remember those old pictures, they would pack fish and meat inside the fish, around the fish, in salt to preserve it, and then they would eat that salt. In Sweden, during the 1600s, records show that they consumed on average up to 100 grams of salt a day, and we only consume about 8 grams. That's 12.5 times more than what we consume today. They weren't dropping like flies. They didn't have high blood pressure and cardiovascular event. It just goes to show you how much salt the human body can actually consume and handle. So you would have to be trying to kill yourself for you to die from taking too much salt. Okay, 42% of people in the emergency room that are coming in, they come in with low sodium levels, not high sodium levels in their blood. Okay, 60 to 70% of your kidneys and energy is used for reabsorbing sodium, not for getting rid of it, for absorbing it back again. So these are issues that you need to pay attention to. Really see and see that sodium is not the demon that it's meant to be. Okay, you'll see all kinds of products that have reduced sodium. I load up on the sodium all the time. Cutting the sodium to less than 3,000 calories or milligrams a day will do you more harm than good. Here's the book from the one of the people I got a lot of information. You can go and buy it. It's backed with good clinical science. This is a research scientist that is contracted, does a lot of work with the military, for the Navy. This is a great resource. Check this out. Don't be afraid of sodium. Sodium is a precursor to your actual energy source. You've heard of ATP. in your mitochondria, it is not able to do that connection and production of ADP without enough sodium. And so one of the reasons why you feel tired and weak is because your body's not able to make that ATP energy, and it's because your salt is too low, right? So get your sodium in. It is true that if you're on a high insulin diet, your body's going to retain more water, it's going to retain more salt, and I recommend that you go on a low carb diet, increase your sodium up to the levels that it is. If you're on high blood pressure medication, go and talk to your physician about wanting to get off the medication. Talk to them about wanting to change your lifestyle, and you'll see that your life will change. You'll see the doctor is interested. Show them these studies that we're talking about, that you can use potassium as an antagonist to salt. If you have high blood pressure, you're taking medication. Your body needs that salt, so take it for its good parts, right? And then take the potassium along with it. Take it at a 2-to-1 ratio. Take twice as much potassium as you take the sodium, and your doctor should be familiar with that formula, and you'll get some benefits. So don't hate salt. Be a salt lover. Get your low carb diet in place, and take the benefits that's there for you. Appreciate your time. Hopefully you got some good information out of this week's program, out of the wellness program. You can go to our website to get more information on us and our products. There's our phone number if you have any questions. Thank you again for your support, and I'll see you next week. Oh, wait, I forgot to check any messages. I got one here. Let's see, Jason, this is a great information because I was on 3 Believe products and I increased my salt, and my doctor took me off 4 of my 5 blood pressure medications, and I still have the water pill daily. Good job, Bob. And looks like I don't have any other comments, so I guess we answered a lot of questions. All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you later.